Chapter 6. Daniel and Lucy refused all visitors for the first week of their marriage. Finally, Daniel had to put an end to their seclusion. "There's a party I promised I would attend this evening." He didn't want to go, but it was a family obligation, and he would never stop being loyal to his family. Lucy studied his face, not quite ready to share him with all of the ton yet. "Do we have to?" Daniel nodded. "One of the reasons I came to England was to work out some trade between a couple of the merchants here and my country. One of those merchants is having a party tonight, which means we are attending the party." He wished they could spend the rest of the month together, but he knew it couldn't happen. They were lying in his bed, even though it was well past midday. The servants had left many meals outside their door in the past week. He swatted her bottom lightly. "Party's in 4 hours, wife." "We will attend." She made a face. "I'd rather stay here and make love." She trailed a hand down his chest, moving down under the sheet that was at his waist. He laughed, rolling her to her back. "We make love before the party, attend the party, and then we come back and make love. Simple." "I suppose that will work for me," she told him with a frown. "Although, making love all day and night sounds even better." He laughed as he moved to cover her with his body. "You're going to wear me out, woman." "I guess a break will be all right then," she said with a sigh that was filled with as much disappointment as she could muster. He chuckled. "Never did I imagine a wife who would have me laughing as I made love to her. You complete me, Lucy." He nipped at her neck as he slipped inside her. Asterisk. The party that evening was different than any Lucy had ever gone to. Sure, it was the same people she always saw, doing all the same things, but this time, she was on the arm of her husband, Prince Daniel of Giselvakia. She finally knew the name of his country, because he made her repeat it 10 times every time she got it wrong. Did he realize that Giselvakia was even more of a mouthful than Giselrovia? When they walked into the ball, the butler announcing everyone called out, "Prince Daniel and Princess Lucy of Giselvakia." For a moment, Lucy was shocked to hear her name along with the word princess, but then she realized that she was going to have to get used to it. Many of the society matrons who had once considered Lucy beneath their notice now made a point of telling her how beautiful her dress was. She and Daniel danced 3 dances in a row, which was absolutely unheard of, before he excused himself and went to talk business with Mr. Jacob Swan, a prominent businessman. Lucy wove through the crowd to her group of friends that she had always laughed with at balls. "Oh, Lucy. Or should I say, Your Highness?" Lady Sarah Bartlesby teased. Lady Sarah was her closest friend, other than Charlotte, and she was delighted that they had ended up at the same party without coordinating it. Usually, they only accepted invitations together, so they could each make sure they had friends at the parties, especially now that Charlotte spent so much time rusticating in the country. Elizabeth and Helen filled out their group of 4, and while Lucy liked both of them, she only confided in Sarah. She could tell that Elizabeth and Helen didn't always have the best motives for the things they did. "Please don't call me that. Lucy is just fine. We've been friends since we were in nappies." Lucy hated the idea of her friends making a fuss over her new title. She hadn't married a prince, she'd married the man she loved. In her mind, there was a huge difference. "You know I'm only teasing you, Lucy. I knew he was courting you, but I had no idea you two were so close to marriage. I bet your mama had a fit you married so quickly." Lucy smiled. Sarah had spent many hours in her home over the years, and she knew Lady Stenwick well. "Oh, she did. She tried to talk me out of it." She leaned close to Sarah, wanting her words to be for her ears only. "We went to my family's estate so my family could get to know him for a weekend. He had a special license in his pocket before we ever left London, and I didn't even know about it." Sarah clapped her hands together. "Oh, that's so romantic. So will you live here in London or in Giselvakia?" We're going to spend half our time here and half our time there, Lucy explained. We'll be going there for the summers and spending the winters here in England. All right, whenever I'm abroad. Oh, that's so nice. Does he have a home here? Lucy shrugged, laughing. I really don't know. We haven't discussed it. If he doesn't, I'm sure we can rent a townhome. She honestly didn't care where she was as long as she had Daniel by her side. She would miss her family, but she was beginning to realize that he was her real family. Daniel came up behind her and slid his arm around her. Introduce me to your friends. Lucy smiled, leaning against him. She knew it wasn't proper, but she truly didn't care. How could it possibly be wrong to show her love for her husband in subtle ways in public? Daniel, this is my closest friend, Sarah. We've been friends since infancy. Our mothers have always been friends. She introduced him to the other two girls who were standing with them. And ladies, this is my husband Prince Daniel of Giselvakia. Daniel's lips were against her ear. You said it right, my love. While Lucy blushed, he smiled at her friends, giving each of them his undivided attention for a few moments. I'm delighted to meet all of you. While Lucy watched, her friends fawned over her new husband. She wasn't certain if it was because he was so handsome or because he was a prince. I think it's time for me to dance with my wife, he announced. Elizabeth frowned. Haven't you already danced with Lucy 3 times this evening? You should only dance with a lady twice in one night, and then only if she is the only lady to hold your affections. Daniel smiled at Elizabeth. I have 3 times as much affection for Lucy as any other man has for his wife. Therefore, I must dance with her 6 times. He tucked Lucy's hand through his arm and led her to the dance floor. I missed you while I was talking business. Lucy laughed. I don't think we'll be able to be together every minute even when we get to your home in Giselvakia. He frowned. No, we won't. My brother will be sworn in as king this summer. We'll have a lot to do to help prepare for that. We only have another 2 months in England before we go to my country. Lucy frowned. I hope no one complains that you married an Englishwoman. They won't. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. You make me happy, so of course they'll like you. We'll see. Somehow Lucy didn't think his royal family could possibly be happy with her. Asterisk. It was less than a month later when a messenger arrived at their townhome in London. Daniel was out, so Lucy invited the man in and offered him some tea. Daniel should be home at any time if you'd like to wait here for him, she offered as he settled onto a sofa in their formal parlor. The man, who had introduced himself as Jerome, said, I need to wait for him. The message I have for him is from his father, the King of Giselvakia. Lucy nodded. I hope everything is well in your country. Jerome frowned. It's not, but I must wait for the prince to talk to him about it. Of course you must. She poured the tea a servant brought in and offered him a biscuit, wondering how she could possibly entertain this stranger until her husband arrived home. When Daniel walked into the room and broke the uncomfortable silence, she jumped to her feet. Daniel, Jerome is here with a message from your father. Daniel turned to the messenger he'd known his entire life, frowning. Jerome would never have been sent out of the country if something bad hadn't happened. Jerome, he said in greeting, nodding at the man. Jerome jumped to his feet and bowed deeply. Your Highness. What news do you bring me? Daniel held his hand out for the message. He knew his father wouldn't have relied on anyone, even as trusted of a messenger as Jerome, to bear important news. And who would travel so far with news that wasn't important? Jerome handed Daniel a folded note with the royal seal of Giselvakia on it. I'm sorry, the messenger said simply. Daniel opened the note and stood reading it. His heart filled with sadness as he read his father's words. My son. I must request that you return to the palace immediately. Christian was killed in a hunting accident. You will need to take his place on the throne at the coronation ceremony this summer. We continue to plan everything, and only need your presence to make everything right. My heart is heavy as I pen these words. Please come home to your family. Your father. Hector. Daniel silently handed the note to Lucy so she could read it before leaving the room. He needed a few minutes to himself. He'd just finished touring a home outside London to surprise Lucy with. Now they would have to leave her beloved country, and they would only be able to return on rare occasions for short visits. He'd promised her a life between the countries. He went to his study and locked the door behind him, sinking down into his chair. Christian had been not only a brother but a best friend to him. How could he possibly fill his older brother's shoes? He felt tears choking him, but didn't allow them to fall. He needed to be strong for his family, his wife, and his country. Giselvakia didn't need a weak ruler. They needed a strong man on their throne, and he would be that strong man. Oh, Christian, you were the man trained since birth to take the throne. I'll never be able to do the job you could have done, but I will do my best. If only to make you proud. He buried his face in his hands, ignoring the persistent knock at his door. Lucy could wait. He needed a few moments to grieve for his brother. Surely she could understand that. Asterisk. Lucy let the tears that Daniel wanted to cry pour down her face. Daniel must truly be hurting if he had locked her out. She wanted to be with him, to help him grieve. Surely he understood that he needed her beside him to cope with the bad news. After one last knock, she went back to the parlor, not willing to leave Jerome alone for any longer. Do you need to spend the night here before returning? She asked softly. If it's possible, Your Highness. I was asked to accompany the prince back to Giselvakia. Now that he's the heir, we need to guard against anything untoward. Lucy nodded. I'll have the housekeeper ready a room for you. Her mind raced as she thought about everything that had to be readied for their journey to Giselvakia. She didn't know when Daniel intended to leave, but she knew it had to be soon. She bit her lip, fighting back the tears. This could be the last time she was ever in London. She needed to say goodbye to her family, but there probably wasn't time to travel to the country. She spoke with the housekeeper before going to the small parlor that she'd been using to read in when she had time to herself, which frankly was rare. She needed to write to her family and see if they could come to her, although she knew it wasn't really a possibility at this point. When the letters were finished, she took them to one of the servants. Would you deliver these 3 messages, please? My family needs to know that I'll be leaving London. The weeks alone with Daniel had been glorious, but they were at an end now. It was time for them both to do their duty. She would soon be queen of a small nation in the mountains that she'd never heard of 2 months before. How on earth was she going to manage that? Chapter 7. Daniel and Lucy left for Giselvakia early the following morning. They'd had time to say goodbye to her mother, but no one else. She desperately wanted to see her brother and sister, but there was no time. Perhaps they would be able to visit in the future, but there were no guarantees. Their lives had changed completely. Daniel clung to Lucy's hand in the coach on the way to the harbour of London, the only indication he gave that he was upset in any way about his brother's passing. They'd taken time to pack some clothing and personal items, but they couldn't take anything else. He talked the whole while of his brother, his words telling of a close bond that she envied. He reminded her of her close friendship with her sister, Charlotte. He sounds like he was a good brother to you. Daniel nodded, his face filled with sorrow. He hadn't shed a tear, but his heart had hardened. Becoming king had never been a part of his plans. Instead, he had wanted to travel and see the world. None of that would be possible now. He was the best of brothers and would have been a fabulous king. Lucy leaned forward and squeezed his hand, just then realizing they were at the port of London. You'll be an excellent king. You were trained to rule together. I'm sure your brother, Benjamin, will do just as well for you." Daniel frowned. "I didn't think of that. He's been off at university, but he should be back by now. I'm sure Father will want us all close to home for a while after this." "Do you think we'll ever visit England?" Lucy asked then, her voice wistful. She was trying her very best to be supportive, but she couldn't keep the longing from her voice. She would miss her family. She'd just gotten a second sister, and now she wouldn't see any of her family for a long while. "I hope so. I don't want to keep you from your family." The coachman opened the door then, and Daniel climbed down, holding up a hand to assist Lucy, his mind already on the difficult journey ahead. It would take 8 days, if the weather was nice, to reach the port of Riga. Then it was another day on horseback or 2 in a coach. "Do you ride horseback?" he asked Lucy. She shook her head. "I've never learned. Mother said it wasn't a sport fitting ladies." Daniel sighed. All 3 of his younger sisters were skilled horsewomen. "I'll teach you when we reach the palace, if you'd like to learn." Lucy smiled, her hand going to his arm. "I think you're going to be far too busy to teach your wife to ride a horse." Jerome dismounted and hurried to them. "King Hector had me bring his personal ship, so you'll have every comfort." Daniel nodded regally. He'd already spotted the ship. "Please see that our belongings are taken aboard." "When do we sail?" "Immediately. Normally we would do at least a bit of trading while here, but your father is in a hurry to have his heir back under his roof." Jerome nodded to Lucy. "He'll be happy to have your wife there as well." Lucy hoped so. She knew that he'd been sent away to find a wife, but she worried that his father would be displeased with their marriage. He was no longer a second son. He was now the Crown Prince of Giselvakia. Surely his father would want better bloodlines for his grandchildren than a mere earl's daughter from England. They set sail less than 2 hours later, heading down the Thames toward the open sea. Lucy hid the tears that trickled down her cheek from Daniel. Not knowing when she'd return was something she hadn't bargained for. Asterisk. It took less than a day for Lucy to learn something new about herself. She was not a good sailor. She spent more time in her bunk, her head in a bucket, than she did on deck. Daniel tried to soothe her, but he had no stomach for it, and instead sent down the maid he'd hired for her. He wanted her to have an English maid, so there would always be someone that she felt comfortable with. He slept in another room for the entire journey, so he wouldn't disturb her, because he never knew when she'd be sleeping or when she'd be awake. It seemed that nothing at all stayed in her belly for the entire 8 days they were aboard the ship. Once they reached the port of Riga, Daniel had hoped he could ride a horse beside the stage while she rode with her maid. Her illness made him not willing to leave her, though. Once they were on dry land again, she was no longer vomiting, but her illness had taken a toll. She was thinner than before and very weak. She still felt nauseated more than she should as well. He hoped it wasn't an illness rather than just the rocking of the ship that had bothered her. He tried not to act too restless in the coach with her, but by noon on the first day, she shook her head. "Just ride, Daniel. I know you hate being cooped up in a coach. You don't have to stay in here with me. I'll most likely sleep the afternoon away." "We're about to stop for lunch," he told her. "Are you certain you don't mind if I ride?" He felt badly for even considering it, but he needed to be in the open air. They wouldn't reach his country's border until the following morning, but Giselvakia had good relations with Borovia, and he knew the crest on his coach wouldn't go unnoticed for much longer. He should make an appearance. Lucy nodded, her eyes sleepy and her face gaunt. "I'm sure. I feel like I must be a terrible companion. I'd rather just sleep." "I'm worried about you," he said. "I know you said that coaches sometimes make your stomach upset, but I've never seen it. I don't like that you've been sick for such a long time." She shrugged. I'm sure once we reach Giselvakia, and we're settled in, I'll get better quickly. He reached over and touched her cheek. I hope so. They ate lunch at a small inn, and just as Daniel had thought, the innkeeper recognized him immediately. Prince Daniel. Welcome to my humble establishment. The man bowed low, showing respect. Our country mourns with yours. Daniel nodded. Thank you. There could never be enough mourners for such a good man. Christian had been affianced to a princess of Barovia, and the countries had grown closer since the engagement had taken place 4 years earlier. Daniel slipped his arm around Lucy's shoulders. This is my wife, Lucy. The innkeeper gaped at Lucy. Word hadn't reached us that you married, Your Highness. Are your parents aware? Daniel frowned. No, we had only been married for a month when I received word of my brother's death. We came immediately. I wanted to surprise my father with my bride. It doesn't seem like it's the right time now. He wished he'd thought to send word ahead that he brought a bride, but there was no time now. His father would just have to be happy for him. It's nice to meet you, Lucy said, her voice soft and tired. The innkeeper inclined his head. And you, Your Highness. He led them through the dining area that was relatively busy for midday. This table by the window should be perfect for you. Yes, this will do nicely. Thank you. Daniel held Lucy's chair out for her, before sinking into one opposite her. Will your father be upset that you're surprising him with a bride? Lucy asked. I don't believe so. He ordered me to marry, after all. I just think this is a bad time for any kind of surprise, but hopefully the family will see it as an occasion to celebrate. They were brought soup and a simple meat pie for their meal. Lucy was fine eating the soup, but the meat pie turned her stomach. I wish I knew what was wrong with me, she said, sitting back in her chair, pushing the food as far from her as she could without pushing it to the floor. I've never had a problem with my appetite before. Daniel eyed his wife with worry. I'll have you see my family's physician as soon as we reach the palace. He shook his head. I never should have taken you out of England. Lucy felt a pang, twisting her hands together in her lap. Don't you want me here? She blinked to keep her eyes from filling with the tears that threatened. Daniel sighed. I'm worried about your health, that's all. You were healthy in England, and the trip has made you unwell. I want you to stay strong. Of course I want you here with me. How could you even think that? Lucy bit her lip, not sure how to answer him. I just worry. He'd been distant since the day he'd received word of Christian's death. How could she not worry that he didn't want her with him? Did he regret that they'd married in haste? She knew the trip would have been faster and easier for him without her in tow. Stop worrying. You're my wife, and your place is at my side. He took his last bite of food and stood. I wish we could spend a night here to give you time to recover, but it's a night we don't have. I need to get home as soon as I can. I understand. She got to her feet as well, following him as he paid the innkeeper and out to the coach. He made sure she was settled comfortably inside the conveyance before he went to Jerome, who rode beside the coach. I need to ride. Jerome nodded, getting down and going inside to see about a horse for his prince. Minutes later they were continuing on their journey, Daniel riding beside the coach, while Lucy slept inside. They didn't stop that night until they were at an inn just outside Giselvakia. My father often stays here when he has state business in Barovia. King Albert will ride here and the two of them will hunt in the forest here while they talk about politics, he explained to Lucy as they climbed the stairs to their room at the inn. Would you like me to have our supper sent up to the room? Or do you want to eat in the dining room? Lucy wanted nothing more than to hide from the world, but Daniel had already told her that they were close enough to home that he felt the need to be seen. Downstairs, please. Chapter 8. It was just after noon the following day when they pulled into Camberley, the capital of Giselvakia. Just before they reached the city, Daniel pulled up beside the coach and told Lucy that he would be riding ahead to see his family, and they would be waiting for her. He needed to see his father alone before he met Lucy and arrange for the physician to see her as soon as possible. He was worried about her. He'd just lost a brother he loved, and he couldn't stand to lose her so soon. Lucy hated that he wouldn't be beside her when they reached the palace, but she took the news stoically, nodding her agreement. She watched him ride off through the window. She missed the man she'd first known, the one who didn't have the burden of a country on his shoulders. It seemed like the further they got from London, the straighter his spine became and the more regal he was. She couldn't say that she disliked the man he was becoming, because she still loved him as much as ever, but he didn't seem as fond of her. She couldn't help but worry that he no longer had feelings for her, and now they were married, he wanted to move on with his life. She watched out the window of the coach as the children of Camberley ran alongside it, throwing flowers at the vehicle. She'd never seen anything like it, and couldn't help but wonder how they'd known to be there with flowers, but she would find out. This was her new homeland, and she needed to learn as much as she could about it. Her first glimpse of the palace relieved her mind a bit. It was nowhere near as large as Buckingham Palace, just as Daniel had told her. She'd worried a bit that he only told her it was small to alleviate her concerns. It was bigger than the manor she'd grown up in, but not so large that she hadn't been in houses just as big. When the coach stopped, she waited for the driver to come around and place steps down for her, taking his hand as he helped her down. She scanned the crowd around her, hoping to see Daniel's familiar face. Instead, an older gentleman nodded to her. "Princess Lucy? I'm the royal physician. I've been asked to examine you." Lucy nodded, keeping the disappointment from her face. "Yes, of course." She asked no questions as she followed the man into the palace and up some stairs. When he stopped at a room, she stepped inside to see a chamber decorated in soft pink silks. "Where are we?" she asked. "This will be your chamber. Prince Daniel's room is through there," the physician said, indicating a door that led from the room. "I see." Did Daniel no longer want to share a room with her? They'd not slept apart since their marriage, even though couples rarely shared a room in England. Was that how things were in Giselvakia as well? Daniel had indicated there were fewer formalities in this country. "Take a seat," the physician said, indicating a sitting area off to one side of the room. The room was vast, larger than she'd ever had for her own. "Yes, of course. What should I call you?" she asked as she walked to a sofa in a soft green with tiny pink flowers. "I am Joseph." He waited until she was sitting and took a seat across from her. "Tell me what kind of symptoms you've been experiencing." Lucy shrugged. "It's mainly just fatigue and nausea. I'm sure both were brought about by the journey. I was fine before we left England." Joseph nodded understandingly. "Tell me, how long have you been married to our prince?" She frowned, not understanding what that had to do with her being ill. "We were married for just a month when we left England. So we've been married for a little over 5 weeks. And when was the last time your courses were upon you?" Lucy blushed. Men shouldn't ask a lady that, should they? "Shortly before the wedding." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you usually more regular than that?" Lucy nodded, her eyes widening. "I didn't even notice that I was late with the journey here." "There's nothing wrong with you that 8 months won't cure, Your Highness." He smiled, leaning forward to pat her hand. "You're going to have a baby." Lucy sat back, astounded. A baby? She knew that the things she did with Daniel in their marriage bed would bring about children, of course, but she hadn't expected it to happen quite so soon. Joseph stood. "Yes, a baby." He walked toward the door. "I'll make you up a mixture of herbs that will keep you from feeling so ill and help you hold your food inside you." Congratulations. Prince Daniel is going to be very happy. Lucy sighed, covering her belly with her hand. Please, let me tell him. I wouldn't dream of taking that privilege from you. I'll bring your tonic later. He waved a hand toward the bed. For now, get some rest. I'll have someone bring you some broth and some dry toast. It should settle your stomach. Lucy sighed as he closed the door behind him. A baby, she whispered to herself. Why she hadn't connected that she could be carrying, she didn't know, but now that she knew, all the facts added up for her perfectly. She couldn't wait to hold him in her arms. She crawled under the covers on the bed, only stopping to remove her shoes. She was so tired. The baby must need sleep. Lucy fell asleep with a smile on her face for the first time since leaving England. Asterisk. Father, I told you, I cannot marry Princess Genia. I'm already married. King Hector frowned at his heir. Why would you marry, instead of coming straight home when I sent for you? Daniel ran his fingers through his hair, frustrated at the situation. After his brother had died, his father began the plans for his wedding with Princess Genia. She had been meant to marry Christian, but the alliance with Barovia was too important for them to pass up the chance. You sent me away and told me not to return until I found a bride. I found one. Her name is Lucy. You're going to love her, Father. Just give her a chance. Daniel knew his father wouldn't truly expect him to annul his marriage, but he wanted his approval anyway. As long as his father approved, no one else truly mattered. I did say that, but I didn't expect your brother to die. There's nothing to do but annul the marriage so you can marry Princess Genia. Daniel didn't even like Princess Genia. She had never been the slightest bit interested in even speaking to him. Her goal in life had been to marry a future king, and she'd only seen Christian. I can't annul my marriage simply because it would suit you, Father. I love my wife. Love? What made you think you could marry for love? You're a prince for God's sake. You can't put your own needs ahead of your country. King Hector stood up from the table where they'd been having a mug of cider together. You were raised to put your country first. I was. I was also raised to be a man of integrity. Would you have me go to a different country, wed a daughter of their aristocracy, and then annul the marriage because my brother died? What if we'd been married for 5 years and had 3 children when Christian died? Would you still have me annul my marriage? The king shook his head angrily. No, but that's not the case. We'll find her another husband, and she'll live out her life here. Or you can keep her as your mistress. I don't care. You need to marry Princess Genia, though. No, Father. I don't. I will reign as king if that's what you want of me, but I'll do so with Lucy at my side. Not Genia. Daniel refused to listen to another argument and stormed from the room, going to his quarters. He knew his things would have been moved during his absence to the chamber reserved for the crown prince. He went there, slamming the door behind him. He looked around. Where was Lucy? He'd told the physician to bring her up to his chamber for her examination. Surely she couldn't have wandered off already. She was going to scandalize the entire nation with her Giselvakia nonsense. He almost wished he hadn't taught her the real name of the country. Just then, he'd have given anything to see his father's face when the future queen couldn't remember the name of her new country. He opened the door leading into the adjacent chamber and found his wife curled on her side in bed, a smile on her face. He was moved. He knew she wouldn't be smiling if she'd heard his father a few minutes before, but she was happy in his country. That was all that mattered to him at that moment. He pulled back the covers and scooped his bride into his arms, carrying her to his room and placing her on his bed, climbing in beside her. He needed to hold her even if all she did was sleep through it. He had a few minutes before he would need to go back to talk to his father, and nothing brought him comfort like his sweet wife did. How on earth could his father have thought that an annulment was even a possibility for him? He never would have married Lucy if he hadn't intended to keep her forever. Chapter 9. Lucy woke and looked around her, unsure of her surroundings. She remembered she was in Giselvakia, but what room was this? It was decorated with strong, masculine colors, and navy blue prominent everywhere. She sat up in bed, brushing her hair from her eyes. Had Daniel finished speaking with his father yet and come looking for her? Where was he? She climbed from the bed and opened the first door she saw. It led to the hallway, but she didn't have her shoes. She closed it quickly. Opening a second door led to a bathing chamber. She closed that as well. The third door led her into the room she'd fallen asleep in. Ah. So that room is Daniel's room. He must have found me and put me where I belong. In his bed. She smiled, pleased that he would care where she was even while she slept. She slipped her shoes on and walked to the mirror she'd spotted earlier, fussing with her hair a moment. Where was her maid? Surely Cynthia had been sent to her by now. She walked into the hallway, determined to explore her new home without Daniel. He was obviously too busy to take the time to show her anything. She'd let him know how she felt about that later, she decided. For now, she needed to see the palace. She went right when she reached the hallway, because she'd come from the left, which meant that she'd already seen at least a portion of what that path held. She wandered quietly down the hall, passing 2 closed doors, before she found one that was open. 3 girls sat in a parlor, talking. "Father is so angry with Daniel," a pretty blonde announced. "I don't understand why," a girl, obviously her sister, responded. "He told Daniel to go find a bride and not come back until he did. Daniel found a bride. He was an obedient son. Father is being ridiculous." The first girl laughed. Yes, father wanted him to find a bride as long as he was the second son. Now that Daniel is the heir, father wants to find his bride for him. She shook her head. "I heard him tell Daniel to get an annulment and marry Princess Genia." The third sister made a gagging sound. "I hate Princess Genia. She's mean." The first girl nodded. "Yes, she is, but she's also the eldest princess of Barovia, and father wants to keep that alliance badly." "Well, he should just marry you off to Prince Sebastian then. You can be the queen of Barovia, instead of mean old Genia being the queen here." "I don't see why that won't work." The youngest sister shrugged as she arranged the life of her older sister as if it was her place to do so. The first girl straightened up. "The reason that won't work is because Prince Sebastian is an uncouth lout, and father wants me to marry a nice man. Besides, he won't let me marry for at least another year, and he wants the alliance now." Lucy bit her lip, wondering if she should interfere, but finally decided she needed to make her presence known. She cleared her throat as she stepped into the room. "Hello. I'm Lucy." The first girl jumped to her feet. "Lucy? Daniel's new wife Lucy?" She had the grace to blush, realizing she'd been overhead. "That would be me." "And you are?" "I'm Princess Celia, King Hector's eldest daughter, and 4th child." The second girl stood. "I'm Princess Alicia." Lucy looked at the third sister who was still lounging on the sofa as if she never planned to move again. "And you are?" "I'm Princess Tabitha. Daniel calls me the brat because I'm the youngest." Celia wrinkled her nose at her sister. "That's not why Daniel calls you the brat." "Oh? Then why does he call me the brat?" Princess Tabitha had flame-red hair that she was wearing in braids down her back. "Because you are a brat, of course," Alicia told her. "Everyone knows it." Tabitha glared at her sisters. "Fine, I'm a brat." She stood up and held her hand out to Lucy. "Welcome to the family, Lucy." Lucy forgot all about what they'd been saying when she walked up. She had 3 new sisters, and she was thrilled for the chance to get to know them. "It's nice to meet all of you. I left my sisters back in England, and I'm dreadfully lonely for them." Tabitha rushed forward and hugged Lucy. "You have 3 new sisters here. We're happy to have you join us." She took Lucy's hand and pulled her into the parlor, sitting up straight rather than lounging over the whole sofa so Lucy would have room. "This is our parlor. We have to share one." "It's lovely," Lucy told her. The other 2 sisters resumed their seats, studying Lucy carefully. "Do you love Daniel?" Celia blurted out after a moment. Lucy didn't hesitate. "I wouldn't have married him if I didn't. I think he's the most wonderful man alive." Celia smiled. "How did you meet him? Were you at one of your English balls?" Her eyes were lit up at the idea of a ball. Lucy smiled, sensing that these princesses were just girls like any others, despite the fact that they wore silk from head to toe. "We did meet at a ball. He saw me across the room and decided I was the woman for him. He came over and introduced himself to me, which just isn't done in England." Alicia wrinkled her pretty little nose. "Why isn't it? Don't you think it's silly that men can't just introduce themselves to women in your country?" Lucy laughed, liking the 3 of them already. "I do think it's silly. So does Daniel." She leaned forward as if to impart a secret. "My mother was scandalized that he introduced himself to me, but couldn't say anything because he's a prince." The 3 sisters giggled. "Did you dance with him then?" Celia asked. "I did. We danced one dance, and I refused to give him my address, because I didn't trust him." Lucy knew instinctively the sisters would like that. "Even though you knew he was a prince?" Tabitha asked. "I thought all ladies wanted to marry princes." Lucy shrugged. "My sister always did, but not me. I just wanted a man who would love me and let me live in the country." Celia and Alicia exchanged a look. "Daniel can't let you live in the country." "I'm sure he would if he could," Alicia said, "but now that he's going to be king, his job is here in the capital." "I know that," Lucy said. It was easier marrying a prince who wasn't going to be king, though. She hoped the sisters would understand, because she wasn't certain she could explain. "You don't want to be a queen?" Celia asked. "You know, I've never really thought about it. I didn't consider it when we were first married, because he didn't expect anything to happen to Christian. Then I didn't think about it on the way here, because I was so sick." Tabitha frowned. "Are you still sick? Have you seen the physician?" "I have seen him, and it was just sickness from the ship. I'm all right now," Lucy fibbed. She wanted Daniel to be the first to know about the baby. She was honestly relieved to have sisters she could tell small fibs to. Charlotte had made her crazy with her ability to detect all lies the way she did. "Do you know where Daniel is?" "He's in the war room with Father, Benjamin, and Samuel, Father's military advisor." Lucy frowned. "Is Giselvakia at war?" Alicia gave Lucy a look that made Lucy feel like she was crazy. "Of course, we're not at war." "Why would you think that?" "Well, you said that they were with the military advisor in the war room." Lucy wasn't certain what about that statement had been unclear. "Oh," Celia said. "Samuel is really Father's advisor about everything, but he prefers to be called the military advisor. He likes guns and weapons a lot." "He sounds like an interesting man," Lucy said with a frown. She hoped the man wouldn't try to start a war, just so he could be part of it. "Oh, he's wonderful. He's a bit odd, but he's a lot of fun to be around." Alicia jumped to her feet. "We'll take you to them. Daniel needs to present you to Father anyway." "Oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that." Lucy immediately recalled the conversation she'd interrupted. She knew she wasn't ready for that. Celia linked her arm through Lucy's. Father's very kind-hearted. I'm sure he'll love you just as much as we do. He will? Lucy asked. Oh, yes. By now, he's probably completely forgotten he wanted you to get an annulment, Tabitha said. Hush, Tabby, Celia said. That wasn't for Lucy's ears. They walked through the narrow hallways of the palace quickly as they talked. The family lives in the new portion of the palace, Alicia told her. It was built on just 100 years ago. The war room is in the old part of the building. Why are they in the war room? Lucy asked. Oh, that's where they always have their meetings, Tabitha said. It makes Samuel happy. He's a bit of a warmonger, you see. When they reached the war room, Celia opened the door and walked in without knocking. Father, we brought Lucy to meet you. We like her, and we're going to keep her no matter what you say. Alicia nodded. She's nice, and we're happy to have her as a sister. Jeannie is mean. Tabitha just nodded emphatically, indicating she agreed with her sister's words. All three sisters remained unshrouded by color, indicating to Lucy that they had good intentions. Lucy found Daniel, away from the others, his arms folded over his chest. She went to him immediately, standing on tiptoe, to kiss his cheek. I missed you. Daniel wrapped an arm around Lucy's shoulders, hugging her to his side. Father, this is my wife, Lucy. For once I agree with my sisters. I'm keeping her. King Hector frowned, walking over to Lucy as if to take her measure. She doesn't look healthy, Daniel. Send her back and marry Genia. No, father. She's fine. He looked at Lucy and whispered, You are fine, aren't you? Lucy nodded. I am. We'll talk about it later. If it has to do with your health, we'll talk about it now, King Hector insisted. If you're going to be healthy enough to bear my grandchildren and the future king of this country, I need to know why you look so pale. Lucy blushed, hating that so much attention was focused on her. I'd rather speak to my husband in private. Hector glared at her. I'm the king of this country. When I give an order, I expect it to be obeyed. Lucy shrugged. To me you're just a father-in-law, she told him, her voice shaking. I refuse to obey orders that make no sense. It was difficult for her, but Lucy knew she needed to stand her ground, or the king would constantly be telling her what to do. Hector looked at Daniel, frowning. Of all the girls in England, why did you have to pick a sassy one? Daniel kissed the top of Lucy's head, knowing his wife had already won his father over. I picked the one I fell in love with, father. You didn't want me to pick one who was afraid of you, did you? Good God, no. You should marry one with a bit of a temper. They'll keep you happier. The king looked at everyone who was assembled in the room. Everyone out except Daniel and his wife. He looked at Lucy. You have 3 minutes alone with him. With that, Hector ushered everyone out of the room, leaving Lucy alone to talk with Daniel. You father, he's an overbearing, pompous king? Why yes, he is. Lucy giggled softly. Those weren't the words I was going to use, Lucy said. Daniel shrugged. The truth is never the wrong thing to say. He looked at her, noting that her cheeks finally had a bit of color. Maybe it was the constant motion from the ship and then the coach that made her so sick. What did Joseph tell you? Lucy smiled. He said there's nothing wrong with me that won't be better in about 8 months. What happens in 8 months? Daniel asked, confused. That's when our child will be born, she told him with a smile. You've been sick because you're having a baby? Really? She nodded. Really? It all makes sense now that I think about it. I'd have gotten sick even if we'd stayed in England. Daniel stared at her, stunned. A baby. I'm going to be a father. He threw his arms around her, lifting her off her feet. I couldn't be happier. Lucy smiled. I couldn't either. I can't wait to write my family to tell them. You watch, we're going to tell father that you're expecting, and he's going to act like he set up the marriage, and all this was his idea all along. Hector burst into the room then, the entire group following him in. Well? What's wrong with the chit? Not a thing, Daniel told him. You're going to be a grandfather. Hector stared back and forth between the two of them, his face lit with excitement. A grandfather? I knew I did the right thing sending you away to marry. See? Now this country will soon have an heir. He reached out and grabbed Lucy, enveloping her in a bear hug. Welcome to the family, daughter. Asterisk. Later that night, after they had retired for the evening, Lucy lay with her head on Daniel's shoulder. Are you really happy about the baby? She asked. Of course I am. It's what this country needs to stop mourning my brother. Would you like to name the baby Christian? If it's a boy, she asked. Daniel thought about that for a moment. Would you mind? You never even met him. No, I wouldn't mind. From everything I've heard, he was a good man. All through dinner with his family, they'd spoken of little but Christian. The only other real topic was the baby Lucy was carrying. He was a good man. I'd be very happy to name him Christian if you don't mind. Daniel hugged her close to him. Daniel, what would you have done if your father hadn't relented? If he'd said you had to annul our marriage to marry Jennifer? Daniel didn't comment on her confusion over the princess's name. He wasn't even a bit surprised by it. I would have left the country before I would have annulled our marriage. What father was asking me to do was wrong, and he knew it even as he asked it. I'm sure he'll just marry one of the girls to Prince Sebastian, and he'll still have the alliance he wants. You'd have given up your kingdom? Really? Daniel kissed her nose. Of course, I would have. I married you because I love you. I wouldn't have given you up for anything. Lucy stared at him in the darkness. You did? You love me? Daniel sighed. I thought you would know. I don't pursue every woman I meet with such single-mindedness. Yes, I love you. I would never have married you otherwise. But, in your country, people don't often marry for love. That doesn't mean I didn't. And when people marry without love, they often find it after their vows are spoken. He held her close to him. I wouldn't have married Genia even if I'd come home with no wife. She's a self-centered beast of a woman. She said mean things to my sisters so they'd leave her alone with Christian. Even Christian didn't like her, but he wanted the alliance. I'm so glad you said that. I've been worried you regretted marrying me. Daniel was stunned. How could I ever regret marrying you when I love you with all my heart? You haven't been acting like you love me for the past fortnight, she told him. I really thought if you'd ever had feelings for me, they were gone. He shook his head. You've been ill, and I was mourning my brother. I didn't feel like I could include you in that, because you never knew him. You're not mourning him now? The whole family will remain in mourning for 6 months, of course. Seeing my family again, talking about Christian has lessened my grief. We'll go to his grave tomorrow, and I'll say goodbye. You and your father? She asked. No, my wife and I will go. I need you by my side, Lucy. Lucy smiled. I'm happy to go with you. I love you, Prince Daniel of Giselvakia. He laughed. For a moment when my father was at his worst today, I regretted teaching you to say the name of my country correctly. I could just imagine the look on father's face if you called the country Giselvakia. Lucy giggled. I can be your secret weapon. If he angers you again, I'll call it Giselvakia in front of him. That sounds like a wonderful plan to me. How had he been so fortunate to marry the woman who could make him smile at his lowest moment? Lucy was his other half, and he was never letting her go. Epilogue. Lucy sat down on the sofa in the family parlor where she'd first met Daniel's sisters and opened her letter. She'd been waiting for news from home, and she finally had it. Dear Lucy, we all miss you terribly. We understand why you had to leave without saying goodbye, but we're all planning a trip to Giselvakia to see you just as soon as Diana is well enough to travel after giving birth. Are you ready for the news? You know all those books you read saying you could tell if the baby would be a boy or a girl, and you were certain you'd be able to tell? They never would have worked with Diana, because she had twins. A boy and a girl. They named them Roland and Christiana, after some ancestors they read about. It turns out, we're related to Diana from many centuries ago. She is the descendant of a man who was born a peasant but later rode with King William the Great's army at the Battle of Hastings. His wife's sister is the Christiana they named the baby for. Diana finally gave up trying to knit, and instead she did some genealogical research. We're all related, and that explains our having similar powers. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, it looks like you and I will be having our babies near the same date. Little William is ecstatic to be a big brother. I'm happy to hear you're doing well. We're going to do our best to be there for Daniel's coronation next month. Mother wouldn't miss her son-in-law being crowned king for anything. Did I mention yet that we all miss you? Much love. Charlotte. Lucy folded the letter and set it down on the table. Her sisters were doing well. She put her hand over her baby, wishing she could feel him kick, but it was still too soon. Maybe by the time her family came, it would happen. Regardless, she would soon be the Queen of Giselvakia. She looked down at her bare feet that were propped up on the couch beside her. It was a good thing manners were more relaxed than at home. She planned to be known as Lucy, the Barefoot Queen.